Make sure the mic is on too. I wasn't sure if I was going to get the camera to work tonight, but it's probably a good thing that you didn't see what all was going on here, because I had not one and not two, but three furry helpers trying to give me a hand while I figured it out. But anyway, I'm so glad you're able to join us again this evening, or maybe you're joining us for the first time. I'm Pam, and this is the Good Natured Hour. Last week, we did a little chatting about some notable tourist attractions in the area. I think it came about as a result of the tourist traps that I have a fondness for, Wall Drug and places like that. Well, remember to grab a mug with a warm beverage this evening, and it is from the Fishing Hall of Fame up in Hayward, Wisconsin, home of I don't know if it's the United States largest muskie or the world's largest muskie, but you can actually go inside. Yes, there's a furry helper. You can actually go inside this giant muskie if you so choose, and get a view of Hayward and the surrounding atmosphere and environment. So I'm going to put this down before it spills, and we'll get started with tonight's program. This, by the way, this is Joey. This is not tech support puppy. This is actually, he's the senior resident here in terms of the furry roommates. Joey dates back to 2008. He was part of a litter from a dog that I found out in Montana. He's still hanging out at 13 years old and doing really well, I might add. So hopefully he'll stay there. Here comes tech support puppy. Could be an interesting ride, folks. Stick with us here and we'll get the show on the road. So we'll just kind of fast forward through this and get to our first story of tonight. This goes back to last Thursday's newspaper column. If you had a chance to read it, or even if you didn't have a chance to read it, we're going to start off with our story about the importance of water in wintertime. You know, in some ways, water kind of falls off of our human radars in the wintertime. We take it for granted. We've got water in our homes, turn on the faucet, it comes on. We don't give a lot of thought to the need for water for our wild neighbors. And it's actually more important in the winter even than in the summertime. Now, granted, our drought season last year, water was important for all of us, but you know, given a summertime with normal rainfall, our bird friends, our wildlife friends, they can usually find puddles or other sources of water. But come wintertime, what happens to water? What have we seen with water the last couple of weeks? It freezes. And yes, it's still water and it's in a solid form. And yes, an animal could peck at it or bite at it and chew it and swallow it. But that act of consuming water in its frozen state, that's going to come at a cost to that animal. They're going to have to spend energy, you know, chewing on it, breaking it off. They're going to have to spend energy heating it up to melt it. That transfer of heat is going to take away heat from their own bodies, which they run a pretty tight ratio of calories in to calories out in the wintertime. And if they have to spend more calories to get moisture into their system, that means they're going to have to find more food to eat somewhere. So my point, and I do have one, is that offering water to birds in the wintertime is really helpful. Birds and wildlife in general, I should add. Let's take a look. This is a heated bird bath that I have on my deck. It was a gift. Well, it was kind of, I gave it to myself, but it was with a gift card that someone had given me. This model, I think, is still available at Farm and Fleet. At the Park District, we had used different models of bird bath heaters that sit in the water. What we found was over time, they built up a lot of corrosion what should I say, scale on them because of the hard water that we were filling the bird baths with. And that scale then would cause the heaters, we'd have to keep cleaning them, and then they would eventually just kind of poop out, overheat. This unit I've been using now for probably, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 years, something like that. And it's got a heater built into the bottom of the unit. So in the summertime, I just unplug it. I keep the cord plugged, the integral cord is wrapped around the bottom of the bird bath, and then I put the all-weather extension cord away. But it's super simple to operate, and it's probably one of the things that I get the most enjoyment out of the little improvements I've done here around the house. So here we've got, this is a Junco that flew, and this was actually a pretty warm day. This was back in mid-December. It was 55 degrees out. So yeah, there was probably water available in other places too, but you'll see he's making good use of it there, taking a bath. A lot of birds also come for drinks to this bird bath. This pair of cardinals that we have here in the neighborhood, I just love how regular they are in their habits. They come every afternoon, just as dusk is setting in. They get one last drink before it's time to go to bed. He usually comes in first. Cardinals make a little chip call. You maybe have heard it's a high-pitched little sound. He'll be chipping to her. I don't know if he's saying it's okay, or well, hold on, let me check this out. But then she'll chip back, and then when he leaves, she'll come in and take a drink. Chickadees, house finch. There's another Junco there. Looks like maybe the female. Bob and I were discussing that a little bit earlier today. I was hoping maybe it was an unusual, one of the more unusual subspecies of Juncos. Around here, we have, here in the northern Illinois, southern Wisconsin, we have the slate-colored Junco, which is a subspecies of the dark-eyed Junco. But anyway, lots of different birds coming in to get a drink. This business of them using water to hydrate in, that's only half of the picture. This is a bird bath. And as we saw in the first video there, the Junco was taking a bath, 55 degrees. Seems warm now, doesn't it, given the cold blast that we've had? But think of, by our human standards, that's still not terribly warm. The bird bath heater doesn't, I should clarify, it doesn't create super warm temperatures. Its goal is to keep the water from freezing. So that can be anything from 33 degrees on up. I think this temperature, I've never actually measured the temperature of it, but I want to say it's probably in the upper 30s or lower 40s. Sometimes I'll see a little vapor rising off of it on those really cold nights that we had. But anyway, the water that's there is used for drinking, but also for bathing. And that's probably where the real importance of these heated bird baths come in the wintertime, because this is a look at what a bird's feather is. If we were to take a microscopic look at how a feather is put together, you can see there's little barbules that kind of knit the different barbs together. There's hooks on those barbules, and all of those things have to line up just right, or that feather is going to get ruffled. Ruffled feathers, they're no good for a lot of different reasons. But if we're talking about birds in the wintertime, a ruffled feather is going to allow cold wind to penetrate. It's also going to allow moisture to get in. If you think about feathers as being the bird's outerwear, it keeps them, it helps them shed water, snow, ice, sleet, whatever the weather might be throwing in them. The outer feathers will keep the bird safe from those threats. And then the inner feathers, the down, that is the insulating layer, and that helps keep the bird warm. Well, if the outer system fails, the inner system isn't going to be any good either. So regular bathing throughout the year is essential to keeping a bird's feathers healthy and keeping the bird healthy. So if you're all inclined, I would highly, strongly encourage you to add a heated bird bath to your lineup of gifts for your outdoor, your wild neighbors. I know they would really appreciate it. And you will too. You get a big kick out of who comes to visit it. Now, after that article ran, I got an email just yesterday. It was from a woman who said that she's offered water year round for many years. And she thinks it attracts many, if not more creatures than the feeders. Even the chipmunks climb up the railing to drink during the summer. Now, today, which was yesterday, she had what she considered, and I do too, to a certain extent, an unusual sighting of bluebirds. Bluebirds are members of the thrush family, so they are primarily insect and berry or fruit eaters. They don't come to bird feeders unless you put mealworms out for them, but they've been hanging around much the same way that we're seeing more robins hanging around. We've been seeing a few more bluebirds that are opting to stay the winter here as well. But she said, this is the third time I've seen this, but the second time in just a few weeks. We live in the woods, so this is not their typical habitat, and we don't usually see them in the summer, but once in a while, several will come for a drink. Again, water seems to be the draw there. The photos attached are terrible. They were through the window, but at least it's obvious they're bluebirds. Well, sure enough, they sure are. Here's one view, and here's another. So again, heated bird bath, even for birds that, and I wonder maybe if this person, since she lives near a wooded area, birds will, even birds that aren't normally woodland denizens, like bluebirds, they might go towards wooded areas for shelter, maybe in shrubs, or maybe there's some trees that have retained their leaves, as we talked about a few weeks ago. Maybe there's even some thick shrubs that still have some berries on that they might be feeding on there. But anyway, you just never know what might show up if you put out a heated bird bath on a cold winter's day. All right, so talking about guests, Chris, we finally, I'm getting to your email that goes back all the way a month ago to December 10th. Chris had sent in a few photos along with this email saying, in fact, I believe the subject of the email was an intruder. I assume this guy came in a few weeks ago with the plants that I'm trying to winter over. I didn't notice him until I saw him inching up the dining room / greenhouse door yesterday. Google Lens gave a lot of options, and suggestions would be appreciated. So Chris's visitor looked like this. And I have to tell you, there's a lot of caterpillars in the United States, and a lot of caterpillars here in Northern Illinois. And a lot of these caterpillars are little and green. So this I thought was going to be kind of tough, but Chris, you sent some excellent photos, and two different possibilities came to mind. One was these guys here, the cabbage white butterfly, which we're seeing an awful lot of these days. This is actually not a native species to Illinois or even to North America. This is a European species that's come over, and it's done really well, probably because it has access to so many cabbage plants across the United States. Anywhere there's gardens or garden plots, like Park District, we've got, close to 500 garden plots, and I would wager a lot of them have some members of the cabbage family growing in them. There's no want for food for this particular species, and it's caterpillar. The markings are kind of variable, but they generally have this small but plump green sort of a impression that you get from them. So that was one option. The other one that we have around here is the caterpillar of this creature here. This is the cabbage looper moth. similar sorts of foods, but it's got some differences. Well, one, it's classified as a moth, not as a butterfly. And when we line up the two caterpillars, on the left here, we've got our cabbage white. And on the right, we've got Chris's caterpillar. Let's look. So whenever we go about identifying caterpillars, even just to make sure it's a caterpillar, there's something you really want to pay attention to. It's called the prolegs. It's these things right here. It's not the up at the front of the caterpillar, which in this picture it would be at the left. That would be the head. You can't really see them too well, but there's 6 legs there. Those will become the 6 legs of the mature insect, the butterfly. But there's also on the caterpillar, there's these things called prolegs, and there's 1 pair, 2 pairs, 3 pairs, 4 pairs, 5 pairs. That's fairly typical. A lot of different types of caterpillars will have several pairs of prolegs. But in certain groups of butterflies, or actually moths mostly, they have a different arrangement here. And as we see on Chris's, we've got 1 pair, 2 pair, 3 pair. There's a big gap. And that gives us a clue. I'm pretty sure this is the caterpillar of the cabbage looper. Looper refers to the way this caterpillar walks. If we go back, this is going to take a bit to back through all these, but see how it moves in that inchworm sort of fashion. That those prolegs and the way they're situated allow the caterpillar to move that way. So it loops its way along. I'm going to go back through these again. Loops its way along the surface of the plants that it's on. I still wasn't 100% sure about this ID. So in our email exchange back and forth, I wrote back to Chris and I said, hey, after I've done a little bit more reading about them, it describes their cocoons as flimsy. Well, this correspondence that Chris and I carried out took place over a period of days. And during that time, he noticed that the caterpillar was moving along. And generally, when let's see, how can I describe that? I want to say a full-grown caterpillar, but a caterpillar is a larva. So technically a full-grown caterpillar would be an adult, but when it's reached its instar right before it goes into its pupa, a lot of times caterpillars kind of hit the road. They want to leave the area where they've been feeding because there's a lot of evidence there. There's going to be chewed leaves. There might be a pile of frass. They don't want to stick around there and give themselves away because that might increase the chances of something coming along and eating them. So they go on a little walkabout, which is how Chris found his caterpillar to start with. He had let me know that it had indeed formed a cocoon. I said, did it look like this? And it kind of does. So again, we're going to wait. Chris, I meant to check in with you to see if your intruder / winter guest has emerged yet. But this is a tricky thing to predict because this is a creature that's now away from, this is how it would overwinter in this area in a cocoon, and our cold temperatures would keep it in that cocoon until springtime. I don't know what'll happen in this more moderate environment that it's in, but Chris, maybe you can keep us apprised if and when it does pop out. You can let us know what your intruder / guest turned out to be. All right, well, let's move on to a segment I call Apples to Apples. If you've ever been to Hickory Knolls, well, we're known for a number of things. One actually is snakes, which we're going to get to in a few slides, but something that's not always on people's radars, but we actually have some pretty delicious ones, are apples. By delicious, I mean they taste good, not that they're that variety. the Hickory Knolls natural area, most of it is made up of acreage that had 100 or more years ago had been farmed. There was, I think, 11 farms were bought up by a group of philanthropists that created the St. Charles School for Boys back in the early 1900s. Much of that land is now the Hickory Knolls Natural Area and the James O'Brien Community Park. But there's still little remnants of those farms and the boys' home in the form of these apples. So this particular apple tree is by the garage that's behind the nature center. And this past year, these apples were really on my mind because just like it was a huge year for nuts, nuts on trees, tree nuts, it was also a huge year for a lot of fruit producing trees. Look at all these apples. In fact, both this tree and the other one we're going to talk about sustained some damage because they were so loaded with fruit. The branches just broke and came down, which was a big boon for all the deer that like to come and feed on these apples. Well, again, the apples were a little bit on my mind. I gathered several throughout the apple picking season this fall. But then shortly after that, a friend shared this article with me. There's a website called Atlas Obscura, and they've got a subsection that it's called, I believe, Gastro Obscura, where they talk about little known foods, and they give you pretty comprehensive backgrounds. Well, this was an article about apples, and it really blew my mind. That gentleman there, his name is Tom Brown. And in his retirement, he has taken on this challenge of trying to, really kind of go back in time and see if he can rediscover different apple varieties that have been lost over the centuries. The article explains about how when this country was being settled back in the 1700s, water, again, we're talking about water. Water wasn't always a given. There was a lot of water supplies that just weren't safe to drink. And as a result, settlers, colonists, they relied on prepared beverages, wine and beer. Those were always considered to be safe. But let's face it, you can't drink wine and beer all the time. Well, apples served as a means of creating beverages that wouldn't necessarily have to be alcoholic. You could juice the apple, you could make apple cider. Some of the ciders would turn hard, like we saw in the Andy Griffith episode, any of you who are Andy Griffith fans, the hard cider. But anyway, these apples, they were also, besides a source of hydration, they were also a food that could be kept over the winter time. Lots and lots of different varieties were developed during the early years of our country's development, because they needed apples with thick skins that could last longer. They needed apples that were tart. They needed apples that were sweet. They need lots and lots of different qualities were bred in a relatively short amount of time to create an incredible amount of different types of apples. They estimate that there were over 11,000 different types of apples, and many, many of those have just been lost to time. Nobody knows, if there's any trees that produce them anymore. Most in our current state of things, there's probably only less than 100 varieties that are commercially grown. And of those, about 10% or 11 different varieties. And we can probably name them. Yeah, I said delicious before, and now I'm saying it again, but I'm talking about the variety. We've got red delicious and golden delicious. There's Macintosh and Jonathan and Gala and Fuji. You can name those most common varieties. Well, anyway, Mr. Brown has gone back. He lives in, I believe, the Carolinas, and the Appalachians where much of this apple variety breeding or creation was going on. So he's taken it upon himself to try to track down old orchards and identify some of these old apple varieties. Well, I read this article and I got started thinking about the apples at Hickory Knolls, and I did a little digging. So this is a 1939 aerial, and again, if you're at all familiar with our property, this horizontal line towards the top of this photo, that's what's now Campton Hills Road, and the diagonal line that comes down from the upper right corner there, that's this Boys Home Road, which goes to the St. Charles School for Boys. That cluster of trees in the inside the angle of those two roads, that was it's a farmhouse, and it's surrounded by trees. Two of those trees are where those apples are that I was talking about. So I got kind of excited, and I thought, well, gosh, maybe we've got some heirloom variety apples at Hickory Knolls. Well, you can actually contact Mr. Brown. I took some pictures of this one. So this is an apple. It's not like any other apple I've ever tasted. They're sweet, but they're crisp. There's a little bit of tartness to them. They don't get really big. This apple, I didn't use my lip balm for you guys, but this apple is, it's smaller than my fist, but super tasty. It got just a little bit of pink on one side. Well, I went to Mr. Brown's website, which is fascinating in itself. If you're at all interested in the history of apples in the United States, I highly recommend you go visit it, applesearch.org. And it kind of describes his journey, how he got into this in his retirement, and how he's rediscovered over 1,000 different types of apples. Well, so I sent him a little email, and it was kind of a coincidence because the day before I wrote him, he'd heard from a woman who said that she was a descendant of the gentleman who developed this blushing golden, and he's pretty sure that's the variety that we have. Now, remember, I showed you that 1939 aerial, and I was thinking, gosh, maybe, this blushing golden dates back to a historic period of time, but it was actually developed in 1959. It's from Cobden, Illinois, which is a little town in southern Illinois, and they describe it really well. It's firm, juicy, and it has a honey-like flavor. It was made by crossing a Jonathan with a Golden Delicious. So if you visit Hickory Knolls next year, I'd love to show you this tree. It's pretty much right behind, well, no, it's not right behind the nature center, but if you go out to our maintenance garage, you can't help but see the two apple trees that are growing there. There's two more trees actually on our natural areas property that I want to pay closer attention to next year and see if I can get some photos and ask Mr. Brown to help us identify those, because I'm kind of thinking those might be even older. They're certainly larger trees, and they might date back to a time when the Boys Home, I know they had an orchard as part of their operations. So anyway, I'll keep you posted if I learn anything more about these apples. And again, check out applesearch.org and check out that Atlas Obscura article too, if you want to learn more about the fruit that you should eat every day to keep the doctor away. Okay, so now we're going to go from apples to corn and talk a little bit about corn snakes. This topic came up, we've been revamping actually, I think it's a brand new redesign for our Hickory Knolls website, which is stcnature.org. And one of the sections that we're going to be debuting in the next week or so is an area called Animal Ambassadors. And we kind of fill people in on the background of some of the education animals that we have at the Nature Center. And it became apparent as I was putting these little biographies together that, man, we have a lot of corn snakes. We actually have 4 at this time. And I'd like to introduce you to them and maybe try to explain a little bit of why we have them in the quantities that we do. Because corn snakes aren't native to Illinois. They are a southeastern United States species. There are a few different, actually several different subspecies, but they don't come anywhere near being native to our part of the country. They are, however, found with some regularity because people let them go. So I thought this might be helpful too, if you get to see some of these different types of corn snakes. If you're out next year and you see something that looks a little sketchy, maybe not like the garters or the fox snakes that you're used to seeing around here, it could in fact be a corn snake that somebody let go. So this little girl here, this is Sweetie Corn. This is what she looked like when she came to us in 2014. She is what's called an Okiti corn snake. This is one of a few colored patterns that would be similar to what's seen in the wild. Now, corn snakes, there's one of corn snakes and ball pythons are the ball pythons are the #1 species kept, a snake species that's kept as a pet in the United States. Corn snakes are #2. They're pretty easy to feed. They're pretty easy to tame. In fact, they have been bred in captivity for such a long period of time that they're almost considered domesticated. Not quite, but they're very docile. And they're easy to handle. When we're doing a program about snakes, we don't have to worry about one of our corn snakes suddenly having a little fit and reaching out and biting somebody. That never goes over well. So here's when Sweetie came in, we were so excited because of this. Not only was she a sweet snake, but she was also just really stunning. This is how she looks today. This was a photo I took a couple of months ago. She and I were doing a program at a local senior living community, and I was waiting for my turn to do my part of the program. I had Sweetie on my lap. As things tend to go, I got distracted. I looked down. Sweetie Corn was no longer in my lap. I asked the woman who was sitting across from me, "Excuse me, have you seen a snake?" Her look, she didn't have to say anything. I figured I'd better solve this problem on my own. And as it turned out, all I had to do was stand up. Sweetie had nestled herself in the cushions of the chair that I was sitting in. We went on. She was a big hit for the residents of that senior community. We also hear, this is Stumpy Hancock. And Laura, I know you know Stumpy's, I don't know if you'd say Stumpy's, well, Stumpy's rescuer. Stumpy was a corn snake that was found loose in an apartment building. This was in 2015. Gentleman, Neil Hancock, wrote me an email, sort of a desperate email one Saturday morning saying, you got to help me. This snake was loose in my apartment building. Some women came upon it. It was in their apartment. They did not own the snake. They were not fond of snakes. They were dancing around and shouting and stomping. And they actually stomped on this snake's tail and broke it off. So Stumpy, Neil went and rescued the snake. She wasn't named Stumpy yet at that point. He brought it into his own apartment where his corn snake, he had a snake of his own, started just having an absolute fit because it could sense another snake. It could sense the blood of another snake, I think is specifically what set it off. And Neil said, we've got to get a home for this snake. So it wasn't too hard to find room at Hickory Knolls for this snake, which is a melanistic variety, which means it's lacking its dark pigments. It's got red eyes. It's not a complete albino. You can see it still has some pigment, but it's lacking the dark pigment. You can see in the right-hand photo that every once in a while, Stumpy gives us eggs. Now, none of them have been fertile, but she's cranked out, gosh, I think 3 or 4 clutches since we've had her. It's always a surprise when we peek in Stumpy's cage. We're not sure what we're going to find. So that's corn snake number 2. Corn snake number 3 on the left here is Kevin. He's actually, I called him number 3. He's actually our number 1 in terms of longevity. He was given to the nature department at the park district way back in 2007. He was about a year old at the time. So that would make him about 16 now. And that's another reason why we like to have these snakes around to show people that this isn't the sort of commitment. If your child says they want a pet snake and you think, okay, this is, I call it the hamster mentality. You know, you think you're signing on for 3 or 4 years and then you're done with the little pet. These animals live, in fact, especially with the improvement in the quality of the rodents that are offered for sale to feed these guys. We buy frozen rodents for all of our snakes. These rodents get a high quality diet. So you're feeding your snake a high quality protein. They're lasting into their 20s. So Kevin is alive and doing really well here. He's shown he's getting a little bit of enrichment climbing on our model, glacial model that we have in our exhibit room. And he's called hypomelanistic, which means he's lacking some of his dark pigments, but not nearly as much as Stumpy is. He's certainly got enough there that you can see the orange and the black, a little bit, actually not black, the orange and the red of his coloration. Now, on the right here, we've got Timmy. And I'm not exactly sure of Timmy's color variety. He seems to resemble pictures of a variety called a red coat. So that's what we're calling him for now. If any of you are corn snake experts or you know a corn snake expert, I really appreciate some clarification on that. But Timmy came to us when his owners were leaving the country. They couldn't take their snakes with them. So he came in as a young, fairly small corn snake. He was an escape artist corn snake. We found out after he escaped on us a couple of times that he'd also escaped on them. He's large enough now that when and he hasn't gotten out in a while, but he's big enough now that it's harder for him to squeeze through the openings of his cage. And he's another great addition to our education team. I think he's got a little crush on Sweetie. Whenever the two of them are together, he kind of seems to be putting the snaky moves on her. But anyway, we've got Sweetie, we've got Stumpy, we've got Kevin and Timmy, our 4 corn snakes. Believe it or not, snakes can get stressed. We like I said, we use these corn snakes for most of our education programs that deal with reptiles and or snakes as a topic. And if we just had the one snake and we used it all the time, they can be more prone to, when they get stressed like that, they can be more prone to illness. There's more chance of them getting injured. So we just kind of rotate through, and if one snake is being used one day, then we make sure that it doesn't get used again the next day. We also have a chart system, so we know if one snake is getting ready to shed. We don't want to handle it because that could affect the success of the shedding. We also don't like to handle snakes right after they've eaten. So another reason to support our multiple corn snakes. So watch in the coming, I would say the next 1 to 2 weeks, our stcnature.org website will be featuring not just these guys, but our other animal ambassadors as well. And I might do a few more profiles like this on our programs. Now, Last week, we took a trip out to the Carcass Cam. If you weren't with us last week, the Carcass Cam is also called the Roadkill Cafe. That's where, in this case, it was a deer that had been hit by a car. It did not survive. A resident requested that we remove it from the area that it was in, which was near their home. So we took it out to a remote area that the park district owns. If you tuned in last week, we watched a couple of segments of Carcass Cam, and you'll notice that this week's view is different. That's because from say December 23rd to about December 27th or so, the deer lay in one spot in this old hayfield. Well, over time, the wildlife that visited it dragged it about 40 feet. So we had to reset the camera. So this is a different view, but you can see one thing hasn't changed. The red-tailed hawk is still visiting the bounty that's provided by this deer carcass. So now this is it started on December 23rd. Well, really Christmas Eve, December 24th was the first full day. And that was the first day that the red-tailed hawk came. It came every day after that, the 25th, the 26th, 27th, 28th. Here we are on December 29th. And there's not nearly as much deer left as there once was, but there's still enough to pluck away. And it's certainly easier than sitting up in a tree or on a telephone pole, hoping that a little rodent will come along and that you'll have the reflexes to be able to catch it. So more free food for our friend, the red-tailed hawk. Is it, plucks away there. One thing we weren't able to tell, we looked at several different angles of this bird. I don't know if it's the same angle. I suspect it's a pair. We have a pair of red tails at this particular site. So I think it might be alternating the male and the female that we're seeing. But red tails always first to the party in the daytime. Let's see, here's another view. Tugging from a different part. This thing is frozen solid at this point, but the meat is still able to be torn off. Well, this is already on January 4th. So and the 24th to the 31st, that's a week. So this is well into 10 or 11 days since the deer was placed out in that field. Let's go. Let's advance now to our next visitor. No surprise, the coyotes are back. But what struck us about this particular clip was it's not just one and it's not two, but there's three. Now, there's several clips showing this little trio, but there was only one animal that was feeding. So I don't know if I'm guessing there was a sort of a hierarchy going on there. And this is either the dominant animal or the hungriest animal, but it was the one that got to eat the most from there. But look at the date on this. This was January 7th. So now we're 2 weeks into it, and this carcass is still feeding. The Roadkill Cafe is still in operation. Now, since this time, a lot of these parts have been distributed far and wide. The parks crew found some bones that have been heavily chewed on. We're going to leave those out there too, because even once the meat is gone, the calcium that's in those bones is going to supply minerals for the area rodents. There's a lot of voles out there. In fact, there was a clip. I didn't put it in the slideshow tonight because it was just such a brief glimpse, but there was a vole that ran over the carcass. We caught it on both of the angles, both of the cameras that were angled at the carcass. Didn't seem to be feeding at all. So I don't know if it was just trying to get the heck out of there before the hawk and the coyotes came back, or if maybe it did come in to chew on a bone or two. But anyway, lots and lots of animals have benefited from the downfall of this one particular deer that made a not so great choice in crossing a road. Now, there's one more segment here. Last week we did What's on the Mantle. We're going to do it again, but with a little bit of a twist. It's actually, let's see if I'm going to stop the screen share here. The mantle actually has a couple of additions to it. I thought it might be kind of fun since we're here doing our fireside chat. I thought of this as I was getting dinner ready yesterday. I opened the freezer. So what's on the mantle is actually what's in the freezer. I wanted to show you, I was actually kind of hoping maybe we would see these on the Carcass Cam too. I'm going to hold these animals up. Oh boy, the dogs are going to be excited about this. I'm going to take these up to the camera here. These are shrews. They've been in the door of my freezer now for some time. I'll do, hold on. Let's see, you see those pretty well. So in the foreground there, we've got what is called a masked shrew. It's one of the smallest shrews that we have in this area. And then on top of the larger animal there, that's a northern short-tailed shrew. Miss Amanda, I know you know about these guys because they can bite. Amanda, I can't remember the circumstance of how you happen to have one in your hand, but they are animals with sharp and carnivorous teeth. These are not rodents. Shrews are actually insectivores. Let me see if I can get this to open up. You know what? It's not quite thawed enough. Let me see if I can do an extreme close-up for you. Can you see? It's probably gonna. It's gonna stay blurry. Shrews, the northern short-tailed shrew has blood red teeth. So that's something if you find some remains, which we often do. Shrews are not terribly long-lived, and they live fast. They have to eat. They have an extremely high metabolism. They have to eat something like every 15 minutes or they'll starve to death. They tend to expire. Oftentimes we'll find them in the middle of a trail, and they don't get fed on by preyed upon by any other animals other than, I believe, owls will eat them, but I don't think they taste good. We find a lot of them that have been bit and then spit out. I think our mammals find them sort of distasteful. These guys actually have venom glands. They will chew venom into their insect prey. Actually, these guys, being a little bit larger like this, they will also eat larger prey. They can attack things as large as mice and feed upon them. But anyway, this was in the freezer, and then it was kind of funny because they were on top of a bag of that holds their cousin. Shrews are, oh boy, the dogs are going to love this. Shrews are cousins to another insectivore we have in this area, the bat. So that's, boy, you know what, I got to put these back up on the mantle because the dogs are super excited about that. But the bats we're not seeing right now. Well, every once in a while, one will come down from the attic at the Baker Community Center. We'll find a bat in the wintertime, but for the most part, these guys are hibernating. They eat insects on the fly, and so they can't make it in this climate in the wintertime, so they will choose to sit it out. They hibernate. Shrews, however, they live down close to the ground, and they forage throughout the year. Right now, our snow cover isn't so great, so I wonder if a lot of these are getting caught and eaten by owls. Hawks might eat them as well. Again, I know mammals don't tend to feed on shrews, but usually if we've got a fair amount of snow cover, these animals are going to be more protected. They can still move around underneath the the snow, when snow hits the ground, I think we talked about this last winter. Snow, when it falls, there's a little bit of melt back that occurs in a layer. It's called the subnivean layer, or the subnivean zone, where it's actually open. There's snow, and then there's an open space, and then there's the ground. And shrews will navigate underneath in that zone. They'll feed on insects that are also navigating under there. Spiders sometimes are under there. And then our rodents, like our voles and our mice, will be under there too. So think about that. When you see trails, as our snow melts away and you see trails, a lot of times those are created by voles, but shrews will follow them too. So that's what's on the mantle, because that's what's in the freezer. So it looks like we've got some chats here. Let's see what we've got. Yes, Amanda, shrews have teeth and bite. Yeah, the apples, they are, yeah, boy, you know what, the tech support puppy can, he can smell what was in the freezer on my hand. So I don't know if I'll be able to scroll here or not. So yeah, there are, Sarah, to your point about the apples not being wormy, they're not perfect. And it really, I think more people might come and pick them if they were more perfect looking. Susie, I don't know if you're tuned in tonight, but I know you found a worm in one. It's a little extra protein, but they are really, really good. And I would welcome the chance to introduce you to them when apple picking season comes around again. Could Timmy and Stumpy come together and produce viable offspring? I think they could. Timmy and Stumpy, Timmy, if we were in the corn snake breeding business, because that's how a lot of these color, they call them morphs. I tend to think of them more as varieties because they don't change. To me, a morph changes, but maybe that's just me. But a lot of these different corn snake color patterns came about from taking one that's got certain type of characteristic and crossing it with one that's got other types of characteristics. We used to have a corn snake named Kim, and I was always kind of curious of what her heritage was, because instead of having the blotchy pattern like we see on all the corn snakes we have right now, Kim had stripes. And she always reminded me of a snake called a yellow rat snake that lives down in Florida, except she wasn't yellow. She was kind of a brick red color with darker stripes down her back. May she rest in peace. But yeah, Jerry, I think they could if Timmy escapes again. We have to keep an eye and see where he ends up. He might have something else on his mind. Those shrews from near here, yes, both of these shrews came from Hickory Knolls out in the natural area, and there's something like they just sort of pop up with a fair amount of regularity. If you're out walking, it doesn't seem like there's any season to it, like it's not shrew die-off season. It's just they go, and then they just sort of expire, and oftentimes it's on a trail or near a trail. And it's or mention of apples in Cobden, Illinois, jogs some memory cells. All right. 1964, the Cobden Apple Knockers lost in the final game of the state boys basketball tournament to Pekin. At that time, all schools, regardless of size, competed against one another, as would be expected. Cobden was the Cinderella team in the. I'll be darned. So I wonder if Cobden, I know of Cobden as being, there's a lot of wineries down there now, but I wonder, they must have an apple heritage, is where the Apple Knockers. They should get together with the Monroe, Wisconsin cheesemakers. Is it the pretzel? I think it's the pretzel makers are the high school team in what's the town? just south of Monroe, that's in Illinois. Yep. Boy, I'm going to be super popular with the dogs tonight because thank you, Freeport. Yes. So how can you tell if it's a shrew or a field mouse? So great question, Michelle. So look at the short. All right, Boca, got to get down. It's enough. Sorry. Can't you mute quick enough? Quiet, guys. So see the short tail? Our mice, our voles have short tails too, but they're longer than this. They're about half the body length. This is a very, in fact, this is called the northern short-tailed shrew. Look at the pointy nose, and then this sleek gray fur, and it's also gray underneath. Our mice, even our local, our European house mouse is gray, but it'll have a white belly, grayish white belly. These guys are pretty much solid gray. They also, they move, they kind of slink. If you happen to see one moving, we'll sometimes see these guys in the, moving through wood chips or through the fallen hulls of underneath our, the seeds on our bird feeder. And they're going around underneath there. They're not looking for seeds. They're looking for the things that eat the seeds. So now the masked shrew does have a longer tail, but it's teeny weeny. I can't get to my lip balm at the moment, but it's smaller than a lip balm when you take the tail away. And again, I'll hold these two up for size comparison so you can see. But yeah, shrews, we have a lot of shrews. I was speaking of tech support puppy here. He's the hunter of the three furry roommates, and I've actually pulled several shrews out of his mouth this past fall. These are, again, they're insectivores. I think they're handy to have around. They're not going to gnaw their way into your home the way a rodent would, a mouse or a vole. And they help keep insect, and actually they will raid mouse nests too and help keep your rodent populations down. All right. I got to remember to take those down before next week. Any other questions? If not, I sure appreciate you tuning in tonight. We'll be back for another fireside chat again next week. We'll be talking about our state bird, the Illinois state bird, the northern cardinal, as well as who knows what other kind of nature will come down the pike between now and then. So with that, tech support puppy and I, we wish you a happy, warm, healthy rest of your week. See you back here again next week, everybody. Take care.
Thanks, Pam.
Thank you, Pam. Always entertaining.
Thanks, Pam.
Thank you, Pam.
Thanks, Pam.
Held it to a dull roar tonight.
Thanks, Pam.
See everybody.
Thank you, Pam. Thank you.
Good night.
Cheers.